Hey, welcome back to my table. My name is Daniel, and I'm just a guy who has finally figured out how loved and adored I am by God. It's my purpose and my passion to help everyone I meet understand their place of value to God and to His kingdom. And one of the ways that I've been allowed to do this is to write a book called Solomon's Song. It's a 90-day devotional, and it's completely taking every passage in the Song of Solomon and it breaks it down into this fantastic love letter from God. And to understand how we click together, God and I, and God and you, to understand how we click with God and do this thing called life is one of the most transformational things for me that I have ever undertaken in my life. And it's changed me. It's changed the way that I view things. It's changed the way that I view the people around me. So we are in actually day number 37 today, Song of Solomon chapter number 4 and verse number 1. Now, if you remember back to the last video, we talked about the wedding and the preparation of the wedding. And so if you missed the wedding, make sure you dress up really nice and go back and watch the last video. And then we can watch that and you can go see the wedding part of it. But this is the part where she arrived at the palace and she gets out of the carriage, remember, and she stands out and she talks to the king. And as they're standing there holding hands on the steps of the palace, and he has got his crown of espousals when he talked about that, and he's standing there with her and they're holding hands, they're looking in each other's eyes, and somewhere in the background somebody's singing, "From this moment life has begun." Okay, maybe not, but they're at the wedding, they're standing there in the palace steps, they're holding each other's hands, and then Solomon speaks to her. Like the words that come out of his mouth at that moment, what is he going to say to his brand new bride? And he could say a lot of things. He could say, "I'm glad you're here." He could be saying, "Man, I've been waiting for this day for a long time." He could be saying just all kinds of different things. Your mind can go crazy with the things he could say. But here's what he says. And there's such a powerful message about God's heart for you and I in what is spoken here. So let's look at it together. Song of Solomon chapter 4 and verse number 1. Here it is. "Behold, thou art fair, my love." Now remember, I said that if you truly want to get the grasp of God's heart for you, take your pen with you every time you see a change of name in this book. He never calls her shepherd girl. "Thou art fair, shepherd girl. Thou art fair, homely one," or whatever it is. He never says that. He calls her names like my love, my beloved, my dove. He calls her all of these things, and it's an awesome picture to me in Revelation 2 where the Bible tells me that God has given you and I a brand new name. We no longer answer the names that we used to answer to. And there's people, I believe, that spend majority of their life and their journey within faith answering to names that they were never supposed to answer to. They answer to names of alcoholic, drug addict, bad mom, bad dad, absentee parent. They answer to all of these names, and it shapes their view of the world. It shapes their view of connectivity and interaction with God, because I never can quite seize what God gives to me and says that I have, because I'm held up and hung up on a name that no one else had the right to give me. Now, there may be behavior in your life or behavior patterns that you did that exhibited those names, and maybe you lived up to it. But let me just say that the cross gave you a new past just as well as it gave you a new future. And so from now on, you answer to what God says you are, and you walk in that identity and in that name. You're not the things that you do. You are who He says that you are. And so when He says that you are complete in Him, when He says you're a joint heir with Him, when He says that you're clean and you're righteous, you walk in those names. And so He says, "Behold, thou art fair, my love. Behold, thou art fair. Thou hast dove's eyes within thy locks." Now, if you remember the last couple of videos or a couple of videos back, we talked about the symbology of the dove's eyes, and we won't go into that. But he also brings up her hair, and he says, "Thy hair is as a flock of goats that appear from Mount Gilead." And you're just like, I picture him as talking like the dad on that TV show, The Nanny. Remember that? "She was working in a bridal shop in Flushing, Queens." And he talks that the dad had that British accent. "Thou art like a flock of goats that appear from Mount Gilead." Or like the boss, Elaine's boss on Seinfeld. He's got that little, "from Mount Gilead." He's got that little twist there. But what is symbolic? Okay, what is beautiful? Number one, he compared her hair to goats. It's not Pantene Pro V stuff. What was up with her hair and why that comparison? And he's romancing his bride and her heart by describing qualities about her that capture his attention. Solomon was ever seeking ways to speak love and affirmation in the heart of his bride. He wasn't interested in just taking a wife for a wife's sake. He was interested in giving her hope and belief in her own purpose. He started out with the names that she went by because The names we outwardly answer to and adopt often set the tone for the inside condition of our soul. And as we get here, I just want to just pay attention to that first part before we get into the goat part, and that is that God calls you righteous and beautiful and holy, and his very change of your name in him has healed your wounds on the inside. You're a vessel of peace through him now. And he compared her to goats, and the Mount Gilead was just outside of the city, and when you took the goats up, when they came in from dinner, and remember a man's power and his wealth was often in this time and culture determined by the number of goats that they had, the goats and the camels and livestock and those things. And so the Mount Gilead was a grazing ground, and in the evening time when the herders would bring the goats in, the number of goats that would fall, that would come off that mountain, it would look as if the whole mountainside was completely moving and just falling. The whole mountain was falling. All the dark hair of the goats as it just kind of rumbled down that mountain, and people would watch. Like, they would stop what they were doing, or they would show up to see the king's goats coming in from the mountain. There's so many of them. It was like a tourist attraction. You know, have you seen the goats yet? You know, have you seen Mount Gilead? Mount Gilead at sunset is amazing, and you see the whole thing, just the whole face of the mountain seemed to fall off as the goats and the rumbling of all those goats, and it was just a sound of power and wealth. And who had that? It was Solomon. And Solomon said, when I look at the mountain, I see all of the goats come down off the mountain. It stirred his heart with, wow, I am powerful. You know, it was a reminder to him of his wealth and a symbol of his wealth. And he said, when your hair hangs down, the way that you move it, it fills my heart with the same surge of excitement when I see your hair, and it just, the way you move your hair, he said, it excites me because I look at you, and it reminds me of how strong and how capable and how powerful I am. And it was a beautiful thing where he says, when I see you, when God looks at you and I by our name that's been redeemed, he says the name redeemed, it stirs his heart, because he said, only I could have done that for them. Only I could redeem them. Only I could take someone who is hooked on heroin and transform them into a father that is dependable and loyal and loving. Only I can take a woman who looked in all of the wrong places for her satisfaction and tried to find value in people, and she was looking for intimacy, and she found that in people that were looking for sex, and she was willing to trade that. And God says, only I can take someone and like someone who is hurting that badly, and I can transform them into a mother that is beautiful and that stirs her children to do right and leads by example and has a beautiful home and becomes this Proverbs 31 woman. God says, only I can take a child who is searching for answers and searching for identification and in all of these things and all of these chemicals and all these substances, and I can take that child and transform them into an adult that is focused and clear and following after purpose. God says, only I can change and only I can redeem, and it stirs his heart. I mean, it's not being braggadocious or it's not being vain to say God's proud of me. I look at that and I say God is proud of himself when he sees me. He says there was a guy that was hurting, that was stuck in religion, that was dying on the inside, looking to find value and redemption, and he found it in my name, and I transformed Daniel. Daniel's no longer this guy that's identified by what he did, what he had, or what people thought of him. And Daniel is this guy who finally understands that he's loved and adored by God. Can I just tell you that God's name for you, his very name change for you, stirs his heart? Just like any active waterfall or anything that God created that stirs his heart with, only I could have done that. Only I can make the Borealis lights. Only I can make the Rocky Mountains. Only I can make the Grand Canyon. He looks at us and he says, man, only I can do the redemptive work that I've done in them. Now let me ask you a question. I try to ask questions every time we do a video together. And what name does God call you now through him? This is really interesting. Someone challenged me a few years back, and they just said, talk about the name that God had for them. And I was like, well, that's interesting. My name's Daniel. And they said, no, the name God calls me. And I was like, okay, how do you do that? And they said, well, you just ask him. Like, I said, really? Just ask God? Just ask him what name? And they showed me in Revelation 2:17 where it says that God has a name for us, a new name that he calls us up in heaven. And I said, well, your name here reflects an attribute. So Daniel, my name means God is judge. In other words, my message that I seem to write with my life through The Man on the Wall, the Solomon Song, Brickman, all the different books that I've written and the things that I've done, the messages that I speak, it all has this connotation, this one thematic message that says God's purpose, not his fairness, dictate the circumstances of our life. That's me. That's my message. I was put here on earth to speak that message. Daniel means God is judge. So when you get to heaven, your name is going to reflect a different attribute of God. And just like there are a million Daniels here on this earth, there's a million people up in heaven that probably have the same heavenly name, because when you see that name, it doesn't recall a person. It recalls an attribute or a thing, and it points you to God, and that makes sense. If my name, Daniel, displays an aspect of God's heart, and your name displays an aspect of God's heart here, then wouldn't it make sense that my name would just display God? So I asked God, I said, what is my name? And would you just tell me what my name is? What do you call me? And all of a sudden, bam, this word popped into my head. And I thought, well, that's just me thinking it. And every time I had done that, after that same name popped up. And I asked somebody else to do it. And a word popped in their head that was completely different than mine. I thought, that's really bizarre. And that's really cool. So what name has God called you? I challenge you today to take some time and just get alone with God and ask him, what name do you have for me? And listen listen internally and listen. And that name, that word pops up, and understand that that is something of value to you. Now, I know some people who ask God, what is my name? And he's given them the name Strong. One person says, give me the name Beautiful. Like that name popped up. For me, the name that popped up was the word loved. Loved. That word has taken on a whole different meaning for me. I've adopted that as my name. It's like, no, that's what God calls me, actually. That's my name, loved. Loved. I believe that. What names did you answer to before you were brought into a relationship with the King? And that's the tough one. I challenge you today to do something maybe painful. Go back in your mind and list out the names that maybe you used to listen to before you were in a relationship with God. What names were they? How do the names he now calls you to feel? That's the third question. What is your name by God? What names did you used to answer to? And how does it feel? What does it cause you to feel to know the names that God calls you now? Righteous, beloved, redeemed. I want you to think about the power of your name, because your name reflects your message. It reminds you of why you're in a spot or in a situation. And sometimes we go through some really heavy things, and what keeps us going is an understanding of why we're there, our purpose and our name in that situation. Man, that is our day today. Next time we get together, we're going to talk about the smile, because as he tells her about her hair, she smiles. And when she smiles, the king does something that is a first for him. He says something to her, and what he says unlocks something so powerful in you and I's understanding of God and how he speaks to us today. I cannot wait for you to see this. That is in the next video we get together on day 38. Have a fantastic day, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.